Hello, colleagues. The purpose of this video is to go over scoring updates for senior defenses at Shelby County High School for the year 2026. Some of you have done this before, especially those of you at the ATC, and some of you, this is your first time, whether you're stepping in as a support staff. So thank you so much for in advance for being here on Friday. I do want to go over some changes that have happened at the district level and how that impacts scoring. So this will be helpful to those of you who are new and or returning. So this first document, it comes straight from the district webpage, and this is basically a bulleted checklist. From the district webpage, I just took it and took the bullet points and turned them into check boxes so that the room facilitator can have a place to check to make sure all of the criteria was made. And so this is also where they're going to write down the score, and they will send a copy of this as well as the individual competency rubrics. They will send this in a folder down to Miss Heather in the lobby after they're done presenting, and she will submit their score to the district scoring response sheet. So let's look at the criteria. The first is that this year, seniors must defend all 6 competencies. Last year it was 4. This year they're required to defend all 6, so they're going to hit all parts of the profile of a graduate. They're going to include a minimum of 4 pieces of evidence, and those are those artifacts that they use to prove that they have met the criteria on the profile of a graduate. So these are their projects or their pathways or whatever it is that they're to show what they have done to meet those individual bullet points. Now, one of those is going to be a resume. So some students will choose to use their resume as an artifact that they actually defend competencies, and some are just going to submit the resume as well and then defend the competencies throughout other pieces of the profile of a graduate, throughout the other artifacts. For each one of the artifacts, well, it's somewhere. This last one is a little bit tricky. It says each defense must conclude with a 3-part narrative. And that's a baseline of where they were regarding the competency, where they're at now, and where they still need to grow. This is a little bit loosey-goosey, meaning the district criteria says it must conclude. So conclude could be either after each artifact. They could talk about those competencies and their growth, or they could choose to holistically at the end of the entire defense. Either way is fine as long as I have that narrative of growth in the competencies somewhere in the defense. This year, the time has shifted from 10 to 15 minutes to 12 to 16 minutes. They, of course, must have their digital presentation. They must also, of course, present this to you. And the biggest difference on that this year is we're not scoring the presentation as far as the speaking skills. That last year, if you remember, or if you don't remember because you didn't do it, last year, the rubric had effective communicator and we were looking at their ability to give a good presentation. That is no longer the case. So, yeah. So you don't have to score their presentation skills. They just have to give one. And then lastly, they should dress professionally. And for those of you that have students that are defending anything CTE or ATC related, as long as what they're wearing reflects their presentation in some way. So we don't want students in the nursing pathway, if they're not actually talking about nursing at all, they shouldn't be wearing their scrubs. That rarely happens, but just in case. And why does this matter? Well, it's a requirement that they dress professionally. And 2, the criteria is pretty tight, which we'll look at in just a minute. But if it comes down to like splitting hairs on whether or not they should defend, if the student came all wrinkled in pajamas versus they really put their best forth, that could be a hair splitter. So it does matter. So those are the criteria. And now I'm going to look at the actual rubrics. So here is a copy of one of the 6 rubrics, and there are 6, so it's quite a bit to keep up with. But the reason why there are 6 rubrics is because they have to defend all 6 competencies. So there is a rubric for each competency. I obviously don't need to show you how to determine whether or not they do or do not meet expectations. You can read that yourself, but the language is there. Obviously, keywords are in bold. So you will select one of these criteria in the top area. So does not meet, meets, or exceeds. And then, of course, you can circle the indicators below that they have discussed. And this is important that we actually do mark up the rubrics, especially if they don't pass, so that we can give them specific feedback. So as they're presenting, if you will, circle the indicators. Now, because there are 6, we have been given some guidance on like the best way for a panel to keep up with all of that paperwork. So the suggestion is that for a panel of 3, each panel member would take 2 of the competencies and really that be their lane that they stay in, instead of trying to track all 6 and you guys trying to calibrate at the end. I, for example, would have critical thinker and responsible collaborator, and the next panel member would have 2 more. And for every person that presented throughout the day, I would just focus on that, and that would help me. I assume by the third one or so, you'll kind of have a feel for the rubric and the wording of it, and you'll have a better flow of scoring. And then also, as I mentioned, circle the indicators. I do want to mention that the rubric says that they should have 2 indicators. At Shelby County High School, we asked them to have 3. This gives them a little bit of grace in case one of them isn't super strong. So they should all have at least 3 indicators for every competency. Not a problem that they have 3. It is a problem if they have less than 2, though. So we would definitely still pass them if they only had 2, as long as those 2 met the expectation. So each of you will have 2 of these, and we have paper copies for every student for you to mark up for them. And yeah, if we'll move on to the next. So this is a document that you will use after the student's done presenting and whenever they have stepped into the hallway for you to basically calculate their grade. And this is a continuum. In the past, it's always been kind of a little subjective of whether or not like they did enough. Here, there's no longer ambiguity. We are really clear now on what they have to do to get meets or exceeds. And this is just a screenshot, so it doesn't have the entire list on the continuum. Because when you have the paper copy or if you open up the link to the district webpage, you'll see that middle criteria meets expectations. It's a continuum because there are 15 different ways they could get meets expectations, and it all depends on a lot of variables, which again I won't read to you, but I will look at one and let you kind of see how this continuum works. So I'm just kind of shooting from the middle, directly in the middle. I'm looking at the middle column, meets expectations, 1, 2, 3, 4 down. What says student meets expectations in 3 of the competencies, which means they would have scored, what we would call a 3, but it meets expectations and exceeds expectations in 3 competencies. So of the 6, 3 of them were meet and 3 of them were exceeds. Well, before we're like, okay, does that mean that they meet or exceed? Do we give them a 3 or 4? Well, the formula is now here laid out for us. If it was 3 and 3, then we're going to put meets expectations, not exceeds. So if you look over to the right, to get exceeds expectation, there's 3 ways you can do that. One of them is obviously the very top one, to be perfect straight across. They got exceeds on everything. But in order to get exceeding expectations, we think that you can also have a few areas that weren't as strong. They could have met expectations. So you can look at those examples below. Again, don't need to read all of these to you, just wanted to show you how this works. Basically, there are many different ways to get to a score, and we don't have to guess. We just have to select on the continuum based off of how we scored them on those individual rubrics. So after you are done discussing where they land on the continuum, your room leader will, or host, whatever we want to call them, will on this first document have the student's name. We'll check out that they met all the criteria, and there's a place to write down their score, which would be does not meet, meets, or exceeds expectations. So you'll write that on this document, and then any feedback that you want to give them can go on here. That will be helpful to the students as opposed to them looking over all of our all over the place notes. You don't have to write down everything in the notes section, but any big things that you want them to take away, especially those that need to resubmit. So again, if there are any questions, you can reach out to Bobby Carana. And thank you again for your work in supporting our seniors on their defenses of learning. Also, don't be afraid to not pass kids if they didn't earn it. There is still time for them. They've got a couple months, and we certainly don't want to give it away. They have known about this for years. They knew this was coming. So yeah, I certainly don't want to be hard on them, but I want to hold them to a high expectation. So when in doubt, if they didn't earn it, they didn't earn it. And if you're on the fence, that's why you have a panel and you don't have to make the decision on your own. There are three of you. So come to an agreement. So thank you.